it's very hard to have a logical discussion with the real believers in AI. They just believe it, and you can see that just with Chat GPT-5. There are a few people who are really emotional saying it's really great. Most people don't, even the true believers. There's very few true believers who wanted to say much about Chat GPT-5's performance. All they'd say that, well, it switches between these different modes well, it uses a little less cloud costs because they've kind of optimized Chat GPT-5 for that and not for performance. Performance-wise, almost no one says, well, it's a step towards AGI. And in fact, Sam Altman was asked that question a couple of days ago. He was asked, well, does GPT-5 bring us closer to AGI? And he says, well, I don't like AGI. I don't like that term. It's not useful. Even though he's been using this term for years. Actually, I should say just a couple years, because that's really, since when he came on the stage, was really a couple of years ago. So he's been using it way too much. And now he says he doesn't like it because there's no good definition for it. Well, he doesn't like it because it's pretty obvious to everyone that GPT-5 is not that much better than GPT-4, particularly on performance.
You wrote a LinkedIn post talking about Anthropic and how they've increased the prices. I think we saw recently that Microsoft came out and basically told people that they have to use AI. So for Microsoft case, it would be Copilot. Like, they're basically forcing employees to use it that don't want to use it. So how good is it if you have to force tech employees to use something? Then you're talking about, you're recently talking about the pricing of Anthropic changing because they're losing money on it. How much revenue is OpenAI doing? Like 20 billion a year? What's their cost? They're losing so much money. Are we kind of getting to the point, it's with ChatGPT 5 being released and a lot of people kind of like, big deal. Are we kind of at the point where you think we're going to see a lot of this hype subside? As you saying, even Sam Altman's not even calling it AGI anymore.
Yeah, well, I think that we're getting very close to the bubble's going to be popping because of these revenues. Altman wants to talk about how everybody uses it. Well, everybody uses it because Altman has set prices lower than its costs. And Anthropic admitted that it had people using so much of its software that Anthropic had to pay tens of thousands of dollars to the cloud service provider for some users because they were using this $200 a month service. So some users it's free up to a point. Some users you pay $20 to get a little more usage, and then $200 a month users are completely all you can use. And some of them were using tens of thousands of dollars, meaning that Anthropic has to pay the cloud providers. That's hard to sustain, right? But this just shows us how ridiculous this to say that these services have lots of users. So what? If you told people, well, you could have this car for free or for $200 a month, when it costs the auto manufacturer a lot more than that. Well, a lot of people would buy these cars if they were priced under the cost. And that's the way it is with any service. And it's hard to find anything we spend tens of thousands of dollars a month on. I mean, can you think of anything? Mortgages, home mortgages aren't that much. Healthcare costs on them, unless you're really sick, if you're terminally ill or something. Maybe you have those kinds of expenses, but it's pretty rare. And yet that's what they're paying. That's what people I should say they're paying. They're using that much. For $200 a month, they're getting tens of thousands of dollars. So that can't go on forever. So Anthropic kind of eliminated this all you can use and set up these limits of how much you could use it at $200 a month. I don't know I think they have some more, you can pay additional charges. And OpenAI is going to have to do that. And I thought they would have announced it by now. They haven't. I would have thought the stock market would realize that, hey, there's a problem. Because you see, if Anthropic OpenAI and other companies raise their prices, then immediately there's going to be less usage. Who is going to suffer from less usage? The cloud providers. See, the cloud providers are benefiting. They're making all this money from OpenAI and Anthropic setting the prices too low. They want to say, oh, we're booming and the stock prices go up. Well, again, of course, they're booming because the prices for the AI software are being set too low. So if the AI software prices go up, the cloud usage is going to go down. And there's going to be some companies, if it goes down a lot, there's going to be some companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, that have too much cloud capacity, right? We've been hearing about this capital expenditures by these companies. I think it's supposed to be over $400 billion this year. If those cloud expenses are suddenly not necessary, you got big problems. And you also have to remember that it takes a long time to build these cloud, these data centers. I'm seeing numbers like more than 3 years. It's all the planning. Then you gotta, you gotta find the land. You gotta buy it. You gotta clear it. You gotta dig. There's a lot of digging here. It's like building a highway or something, or a house or something. It takes a long time. So if the expenditures on cloud services suddenly go down, it's going to take a long time to stop these construction projects, right? Some of them are halfway done. They can't just suddenly. So now we're talking about big money that is kind of left there, a big write-off. And, $400 billion, this is a lot of money. This would really impact on the economy if suddenly those projects, were unnecessary. And even NVIDIA says, well, you got to write off our chips because they're getting better so fast that you got to write them off if you don't, in 3 years. So there could be a lot of capacity that's left here that's not needed.
We're hearing a lot recently about how recent college graduates are unable to get a job. You wrote an article recently kind of talking a little bit about this, but you say that college enrollment is down 15% since 2010. But then it's also interesting because at the same time, we just had the largest graduation class in 2025. And over that same time period, the graduating classes have actually increased by 11%. So since 2010, we have a 15% reduction in college enrollment, yet we have an 11% increase in the sizes of graduating classes. So if you actually adjust for that, it's something like an actual 26% decrease in university enrollment. And then in this article, you kind of go on to say recent college grads are Gen Zers who had their high school education disrupted by the COVID pandemic, had their college education sabotaged by ChatGPT, other LLMs. And then you basically said of a survey of 1,000 hiring managers, is 40% admitted to biases against Gen Z. 41% advise them not to put graduation year in their resume. Another survey found that 58% of employers say recent college graduates are unprepared for the workforce. And another survey found that 31% of employers avoid hiring Gen Z. And then basically you just kind of say that a college degree used to be a path for upward social economic mobility, and it was a screening mechanism. What do you think is the reason for these Gen Zers and recent college graduates unable to find a job? Is that just a bad economy? Is that AI? Other issues? What do you think it is?
I'm not an expert on that. My co-author of that article knows more than I do, Gary Smith. He's a professor at Pomona. He was. He's actually just retired, but he's 75, so that's okay. What I would rather say is there's a lot of factors at play here. Altman and these other guys have tried to focus our attention on things other than, money. That's what a bubble is about. It's about money. You put money in and you get money out, right? And they're not getting enough money out. Unemployment rates and these things. I mean, number of students who go to college. These things involve a lot of factors, and certainly college enrollments are down because people have been critical of colleges including employers. They're critical of what universities teach students. Then you have an economy that's, it's very uncertain. We had that big lockdown, the COVID lockdowns, and so that changed employment a lot. Then the lockdowns ended, so that changed employment again. There's a lot of factors other than, and then just general economic changes occur. There's recessions have been occurring, every 5-10 years for a very long time. This is not something that's unusual. So the fact that, it gets, unemployment rates go up or down, or it's really kind of, well, yeah, that's just part of life. And, we can try to analyze it. And so Gary Smith and I did in that article and say that there are other factors involved. But I think the key point is to remember is that this has probably nothing to do, very little to do with AI. It also, the confusion comes from these CEOs who are convinced that AI is so great. They're convinced that they're making these big investments, they're doing all these experiments, but yet there's no results. There's no company that's making more money from now because of AI, other than NVIDIA and the cloud service providers, electricity providers too, right? They're there too, and data center builders and things. But the average user, corporate user, average company that's using AI, they're not seeing better results, no improved productivity, no more revenues or something. So it's really kind of ridiculous that people kind of claim that, unemployment, particularly for young college graduates, is down because of AI. And you see, it's all part of this narrative. These tech companies come up with this narrative of how it works, and then people start seeing that narrative everywhere when they're not really. I mean, if you're going to look at whether technology is doing well, you have to consider a lot of variables. And if a few of the variables don't make sense, like the revenues and things, well, then the whole narrative collapses, right? And that's why don't just look at one variable, which is what people are doing. They're looking and saying, college grads, which are having trouble finding a job, therefore it's because of AI.
We've also heard about a lot of the tech sector employees getting laid off recently. Going back to the question about the college graduates, what about ZERP? I mean, basically in December of 2008 to about March of 2022, 9 of those had a 0% interest. The other 4 kind of had, almost 0. And then there was a few that were a little bit higher. But basically from 2008 to 2022, we had 0 interest. Yeah. And then basically went up 5.5% in 15 months to kind of break this ZERP in 2022. So now you have all this cheap money that's dried up, especially if you're in the tech sector where you had a lot of idle workers and overhiring from COVID where people were more on their devices. And then you had people hoarding tech talent with these ZERP. And now obviously that's not happening. And then of course, with college graduates, when you also are in a more high interest environment, you're not just overhiring. How much has the ZERP kind of changed the metrics and played into this?
Yeah. By ZERP, I assume you mean zero interest rates.
Correct. Zero interest rates.
Yeah. So this had a big impact on the bubble, the previous startup bubble, and now this AI bubble. For 15 years, that enabled all of these VCs or allowed people to invest in or encourage people to invest in VCs, encourage VCs to invest in companies, and they all could wait. Low interest rates, they could wait. Okay, fine. They're not making money yet. It doesn't matter. The interest rates are so low. And that encouraged this behavior of just invest. And it just keeps going. And then you're right. The interest rates went up. And that's part of why the startup bubble popped in 2022. And all of these share prices for share prices for unicorn startups, publicly traded unicorn startups, went down a lot. And for why even privately traded ones, right? They also, on the secondary market, their prices declined. They just weren't, nobody wanted them. And now we see a lot of uncertainty about interest rates now. And so there's a lot of talk, interest rates are going to go down. That's mostly the talk, is they're going to go down. Trump's going to push them down. Now there are some people that say, well, wait a minute, we've got a big federal deficit. Huge, $35 trillion or so in debt. So the interest rate's going to go up. There's some that say that. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. But clearly, if there's a perception interest rates will go down and they go down, then there's going to be the share prices may go up. People may say, oh, who cares if OpenAI doesn't make money? And by the way, that's kind of the real issue, is whether AI can get funding. If AI can get funding, they can lose money. If investors are willing to give them money and they don't make a profit, then, well, it can keep going on. And OpenAI raised money in March. Now it's raised money just in the last couple of weeks. That's not a very long period, even though they reportedly raised 40 billion in April. Actually, it's April. And now 40 billion of that 40 billion, 30 billion was contingent upon OpenAI becoming a for-profit company. And it doesn't look like it's become a for-profit company, primarily because Microsoft is opposed to it. Microsoft still owns a lot of it. And therefore, you only had 10 billion. It looks like most of that 10 billion was spent in the last 3 months, right? When companies are constantly needing to get funding, you can tell they're losing a lot of money. You pay more attention to that than their announcement of losses, because, a privately traded company doesn't have to they can say anything they want, really. Publicly traded company, there are rules and regulations that they have to follow, and they have to make announcements every 3 months, but privately traded companies don't. So pay more attention to the fact that OpenAI, Anthropic, and these companies are raising money constantly. That's because they're losing money, and they're losing money, as I talked about earlier, right? And this, now, how did we get on this? You asked initially about zero interest rates. Well, yeah, the lower the interest rates are, the longer investors will wait for the company to get profitable, the more patient they are.
I was reading the book, The AI Con, and in the book, she basically, or the two authors talk about how you have the AI boosters and the AI doomers, and they're essentially two sides to the same coin. Both of them think that we're going to have these AIs, the most disruptive and impactful invention in the history of the world. Basically, the AI boosters have more of a utopian version of this, while the AI doomers have more of a dystopian version. But I think you and I are probably, it's like the whole expression, there's three sides to a coin. And we're kind of on the third side, which is the edge, where don't really actually think that it's going to be either one of these scenarios. I think it's more like, yeah, this technology does have some use cases for, but it's vastly, vastly over exaggerated. I'm not worried about, robots taking over or any of this stuff. I mean, where would you kind of put yourself? Like, did I get that correct? You and I are basically on the edge. And it also just goes back to what you're talking about. If you are a doomer, you're still pumping money into it because you don't want the robots to take over and have Skynet and kill everyone. If you're a utopian, you're still, you're pumping money into it because it's the greatest invention of all time. And they can disagree with what they want, but the bottom line is, I think they're both wrong. I'm on the edge of the coin. I think this is all bullshit.
Yeah, I agree. We are on the edge of the coin. I certainly like that metaphor. Yes, the edge. There are three sides to a coin. Yeah, we're on the edge, and it's a very good book. AI Con. Those people have been talking about problems with AI for years. I think Emily Bender was one of the people that coined the term stochastic parrot. So yeah, I think they talk mostly about harms. So there's the dystopian, this is going to cause the end of the world, which I think is overstated. The utopia is overstated. And they are more, well, there are problems, right? There are problems. There's, these people who use it as a therapist and become delusional. There's lots of scams. Somebody calls up a parent, and it sounds like the kid's calling and saying, I've been kidnapped. I need money. There's all kinds of these scams. So there are some bad things about AI, and they spend a lot of time on those. And I think that's good. I think it's people understand these kinds of problems, and it would be good if more people did. It would be good if governments pursued these kinds of crimes more. And by the way, a related crime is that the courts are starting to hear cases, and I think convict a few, on AI hype. So they're beginning to say, hey, this AI hype is in some cases fraud. So in the most famous case with startups is Elizabeth Holmes, but there was a number of others. There was the electric truck company, Rivian. His founder was put in jail. So now we have these, they're kind of smaller cases, but they're going to continue. And I hope that the courts keep hearing these cases. So yeah, I'm on the edge.
You wrote an article called AI is a long way from replacing software coders. I found this part to be very interesting, where you say that a study that was conducted by Model Evaluation and Threat Research found that even though coders believed that AI was saving them time, it actually ended up costing 19% more time. And then you basically say that the study found that while developers spent less time coding, they spent more time prompting, considering LLM suggestions, and most importantly, reviewing and debugging the AI generated code. The results even surprised the researchers. Before beginning the test, one of the lead authors wrote that he expected a 2x speed up, which is pretty shocking. And I would imagine, because you also talk about how a lot of these tests are set up so AI actually looks better than it is. If they expected a 2x result and it was 19% slower, you would think of all the jobs, like you have tech people that are coding, you have coders that are coding. These are people that know how to use AI.
Yeah.
And they're 19% slower. I mean, what does that say?
Yeah. Well, first of all, most of what a coder does isn't coding. A coder is planning. A coder has, they have to think about the customer needs, whatever needs are given to them, translate them into architecture, and then write the code. So really, like 25% of the job is coding. The rest of the time is all this other stuff to organize it. So even if we could make that coding just work perfectly, that's only a 25% increase in productivity. It's not like, they're all going to be employed. But yeah, it doesn't work that way. That 25% of the time they spend on coding, it doesn't get that much faster. And now, of course, that depends on how hard the tasks are. So they use some tasks that they assume could be done, right? Easy tasks can be done by AI. Harder tasks, more complex tasks are harder. So this, it was a very surprising result. Now, this METR that you cited that did the study also did a study a few months ago that really got cited a lot by the AI lovers. So what they did was they looked at tasks, the length of tasks that AI could complete with a 50% accuracy. And they found that the length of the tasks had really increased a lot over the last, 5 years. They were doing it on a monthly basis, because they were said that the length of the tasks doubled every 7 months. And so then they projected in the future, right? That's you find some type of rate of improvement, then you project in the future, and they say, well, it's going to be able to do everything. Now, what got missed in all this is that it could be completed with a 50% accuracy rate. Right? That's a coin flip. That's a coin flip. This is really nothing. And of course, the assumption there is that they're going to, it's going to go from 50% to 60 or 70, 70, 80, 90% really, really fast, just like the length of the task at 50% accuracy rate was increased, doubling every 7 months. And what people ignored was that METR said, well, we did this study because we found that if you look at a specific application, the accuracy goes up, but there's diminishing returns. Right? They didn't go in a lot into detail, but we know what that means. We know that it goes up, but once it gets up to about 90%, then it slows a lot. And you don't want it to slow up, because in the second study they did, and they found the coders used AI assistants that took 19% lower. That is coming from the very small number of mistakes. So what if you have 50%, 90%, 99%, 95%, 99%? You need a very, very high complete accuracy in order that the coders don't have to spend time fixing the mistakes, because you're going to get some mistakes which are hard to fix. As the study said, it's harder for coders to fix errors that were caused by the AI assistant than to fix errors that they made themselves. Because when they made that error, they were thinking through the problem, and therefore they understand it pretty well. And so when there's an error, and they say, I know where that is. But when they're using an AI assistant, they're saying, what did the AI assistant do? Why did it do that? That doesn't make any sense. How do we fix that? It's very, very hard. So you put both of them together, because I think that this 50, doubling the size of the length of the task with a 50% accuracy rate, the reason why they did it and the implications of it are really bad, because we're going to have to be up 99.9, 99.99, 99.99%. And let's just think about that for a second, because this is something I spent a lot of time in my past on, exponential improvements and a whole set of technologies. So I wrote a paper called What's Behind Exponential Improvements, published in California Management Review, one of my best cited papers of my career. And so I've been looking at this for a long time. So think about, if you got a 50% accuracy rate, and think about if it does double every 7 months. It doesn't, and the METR admitted it doesn't. But let's just say it does. You go from 1/2 of errors to 1/4, to 1/8, to 1/16, to 1/32, all the way up. It takes you 10 doublings to get an improvement of 1,000 times. So you go 50% to 99.9%, 10 doublings. But 99.9% is probably not good enough, because that's too many errors. I mean, you have to realize, what is the uptime for Google or Gmail or Amazon? You're talking about 6 nines, 5 nines, 99.99999%. And people arguing that's what we need with driverless vehicles, because that's what we have with regular vehicles. You have a very, very low percentage of errors, a very high uptime for these companies. Well, that's what we need for AI. So it takes you 10 doublings to go from 50% to 99.9%. It's going to take you 10 more doublings to get to 99.9999%. Now we're talking good. They're talking about really good. We're talking about, they're going to start laying off all these software coders. That's 20 doublings. Even every 7 months, now we're talking about, about 14 years. Now we know it's not going to occur as fast as that, because METR even admitted there's diminishing returns. So now we're talking, just throw out a number of 50 years, right? So this is the problem, is that a lot of people just get emotional about this. They just say, exponential improvements, all going to get solved. Well, you have to look at how long it took. I mean, the exponential improvements of Moore's law from 1960 or so till 1990, till now, they had a big impact. That's a lot of decades. And people don't realize that it's a lot more complicated than they think. That, AI is going to pick on software, but it's going to be a very slow process that takes many, many years, if not decades.
I think it's interesting, because if you read the comments on some of these videos, people will be like, you guys are stupid. Like, I was in a self-driving car just recently. You guys don't even know what you're talking about. And then it's like, well, you do realize that Waymo has remote drivers. And they say that every 4 to 5 miles, the driverless operator has to essentially give recommendations or take over the vehicle. There's Aurora Trucking Company, which had to put a driver in each of the trucks because they, you don't want an 80,000 pound vehicle kind of messing up, and they had too many issues with it. You had GM's was a Cruise Robotaxi, basically it was too unprofitable and had too many issues that they just went out of business, stopped operating. Yeah. And like the fact is, so it's just like when you went to Amazon Fresh, you had people like in Kenya that was actually checking you out remotely, but you just walked out of the store thinking it was all AI. Like you might not have seen any person in there, but that doesn't mean that there's not people either remotely driving your car or remotely checking you out. I think a lot of these things too, like especially the self-driving vehicles, it's almost more just a way to like make people think. It's like the magic trick. Like everyone knows in the tech industry this is all bullshit, but it's a way to like make people think like this stuff is way more powerful than it is, because you're like, you're morons. I was in a car with no driver. Like, yeah, it's not quite true.
Yeah. Yeah, Rodney Brooks, the founder of the company that makes these Roomba, these automatic vacuum cleaners, he's considered one of the top people in robotics and AI and things. And he said so many times, he said for years, that all of these automated examples, behind them are humans. They're all doing something when something goes wrong. And people ignore him. People, like you say, they want to believe that what they've seen is true. And they think that I rode once in one of these cars, therefore I know. When, I mean, I don't care how many times, that may work with regular cars because they don't, their accident rate is so low. Now it's probably too high, as people pointed out. We should try to reduce it. Okay, fine. Yeah, we can reduce it. But it is so low that you could ride in a car your whole life and never get an accident. Now that's low. That isn't one time. That's a million times, And of course, a lot of those accidents come from young, bad drivers. Like myself, I was one of those bad drivers, And so what if you rode once? And so you're right. It's people making these kinds of decisions. People saying, I used AI and it's great. It's going to take over the world. But if you ask them about the details of what they used it for and how it benefited from them, a lot of times it's only for one or two things, right? That's why I like the details. I always like people to tell me. When people say they like AI, I immediately say, okay, tell me exactly how it benefited you. And they invariably cannot find the details. There's some, but it isn't a lot of details, except maybe with making videos. So videos, advertising videos and things, you can make these videos very cheap. And if it's for a YouTube video, an ad in a YouTube video, well, if it's got some errors, it doesn't matter. So there's a few applications where I'll say, okay, that works pretty well. But in a lot of them, I want them to give you more details, and they can't. People are very bad at this. They just want to say whatever their first impression is. They think that their first impression. And what I urge people to do in my book and elsewhere, resist having a first impression. Resist that urge and to say, I'm going to get more. I'm going to get more information. And then I'm going to make a decision. Don't try to have opinions so fast. Unfortunately, in our society, it's all about having an opinion. And so even in high school, there's these debate societies, right? People are going to debate something that they don't know anything about, but they're going to debate it. And, a lot of people, they come down on one side of the debate, one or the other, and then they retain that opinion their entire life. And so resist that. People, and AI is a good example. You want to understand that a lot of detail. You want to understand it's not just whether you understand whether it's going to happen or not. You want to know the exact application can happen first, second, third, fourth, because then you can be part of the company that offers those applications. And Sam Altman can't talk about that. Sam Altman is off on this, AGI. He's retracted that, but he still believes it. And he wrote this article a few years ago about Moore's Law for everything, where he was just kind of so general. When I was young, I did my PhD in economics of robots. back in early 1980s at Carnegie Mellon. And I realized how important it was to understand work, because then you can understand how hard it is to automate. And I remember reading tons of books about work and spending my life trying to understand what jobs people do, because that's where you learn about what can be automated. And too many people, they just look at their own job and they think, well, I can build a website really fast, therefore AI is going to take over the world. Well, what does that have to do with having AI help you manufacture products or do fishing or mining or healthcare, or right? There's all these types of work out there. And I urge you, learn about that. Learn about work. What's work?
Just kind of on your last point, you basically get these people in Silicon Valley or whoever that work on tech, so they have that expertise, but then they think they're going to automate these other jobs, but they've never actually worked in that sector, and they have really no idea what that actual job entails. And we talked about like IBM Watson. I mean, to think like IBM Watson came to fame in 2011 because it beat Ken Jennings on Jeopardy. So really, what does this, I mean, so you basically have Ken Jennings, who has a bunch of useless knowledge, versus AI machine. The AI machine won in 2011. But what does it have to do with actually doing diagnoses? And one of the big things I thought was interesting and why it failed was that the doctor was supposed to coordinate with this AI machine, yet the AI machine couldn't understand the doctor's handwritten notes, couldn't understand the abbreviations. And it's like, yeah, but these are all real world things. Like, I guess I feel like it's easy to be like, oh, this person's job is 30% office work, therefore we can automate 30%. That way, therefore we can get rid of 1/3 of the department. It doesn't really work that way. Does it? I mean, I can't imagine it working that way.
No, it doesn't. First of all, you have to put all the tasks together, and that's the hard part. And so, just because it can do a bunch of these individual tasks, how are they going to be put together? The second thing is I want to go back to what you said initially, because it's about this Jeopardy. Regurgitating information. A lot of people think that, a lot of AI people at least, think that that's what jobs are, regurgitating information. So they've emphasized this, oh, look at our AI can pass all these exams, can pass the exam for, being a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or so on, and they can perform better than humans. But that's not what humans do in jobs. It's not about regurgitating information. It's about solving problems. The doctor has to figure out what's wrong with the patient, or if anything's wrong, and then propose solutions. That's different than regurgitating information. And these exams, the fact these exams exist, does not help us understand AI. What it does is help us understand how bad education is, because too much of education is about regurgitating information when people have to solve problems. And so a lot of times people don't do well in these exams because they're not so good at regurgitating information, but they're great at solving problems. They're great at, looking at a problem and trying to figure out what it is, because that's a skill in itself. And that's not really, that doesn't really exist in schools. I remember I got a physics degree, and I went to work in a semiconductor company. And I got there, and I didn't use any of my physics classes. In physics classes, you're given this problem. Assume this, assume this, assume this, and solve the problem. Now, of course, all the assumptions were a big part of the problem solving in real life, because a lot of the assumptions you couldn't make. And they left all those out of the problems because then it made the problem too hard. But yet that's what you did in real life. And so I was pretty discouraged, because I was tops in math. I mean, if AI was around when I was a physics student, graduated in 1970, I would have gone into AI, because I knew math and I loved math and differential equations and vector analysis and all this stuff. I loved it. And then I got into the job and there was no math. No one was using any math. And so it was very discouraging. But, I learned you have to be very careful about what you're learning versus what you do in the job. And these AI people don't understand that. A lot of them aren't making the effort, but there are some. I want to emphasize that there are some, and people think that it's already decided who's going to be the big winners. No, it hasn't. because there are people who are really solving problems with AI. And that's going to get them more business. They will build a small business. It will grow. They will make money. I don't think they're ever going to get, $1 billion valuation, or, $30 billion in funding like Altman got. But they'll solve problems. They'll get business. The business will grow, and they will do well. And eventually they may do better than Sam Altman, because this isn't fixed. I mean, just because these companies are giving him lots of money right now doesn't mean they're going to give it to him in a year when he still has losses. So if you're a serious AI person, keep going. I think that you've, solved some problems, and people will come to you.
Going back to this IBM Watson, the healthcare bot in 2011, I think it's kind of a pretty good example nowadays, because first off, why are they going after healthcare? Well, healthcare in 2022 was a $4.5 trillion sector in the US alone, which is like 17% of the GDP. But a couple of the other reasons they said it failed was HIPAA, like patient privacy situations, where, I mean, how much regulation are you going to have where you're trying to share this data, very sensitive data, across networks and different states? You're going to have so many different regulations and laws against it. And then secondly was just, what's the business model behind it? In one of the articles where you mentioned about how this AI doctor outperformed regular doctors on the test, yet the doctors weren't allowed to consult with other physicians, or weren't able to consult with the internet, which in the real world scenario you would. So I mean, like the test was already kind of ginned up anyways.
That's an interesting case. People made a big deal about this Microsoft model when it was released a few months ago. Now nobody talks about it because the test was kind of meaningless. It just we know that they tested this Microsoft model on some old cases that were available online, so were undoubtedly in the training data set. And as you say, they didn't let the doctors consult other doctors. Well, of course, people talk. That's what people do. Yeah, they should talk. So yeah, but healthcare in general. I mean, this is a mistake that many companies make, many well-funded startups make, is that they go for a big market when that's not what they should be going for. The first application, you want to find the ones that are easy to do, easy to solve, make you money. Find those easy ones. Don't go after healthcare. Find something really easy, solve it, and then you go on to something else. Healthcare was always too hard, and that was a mistake. But it's a common mistake. These VCs and their founders and their evangelists, the biggest mistake, it's easy. It isn't easy. I mean, you look at how few great entrepreneurs there are in history, and I put Thomas Edison at the top. He's way above. I mean, if you look at the number of businesses he succeeded in, it was huge. But, he started small. He started, I think, electric lighting. And people like to say, well, electricity didn't have an impact on productivity until, 30 years down the road. In manufacturing, they say. Well, yeah, it did take a while. But long before that, there was the impact on productivity from lighting, from the very better lighting from electricity than from oil lamps, which were a danger to fires, which made the house black and didn't provide a lot of illumination, right? Think about trying to read, and as a parent, you're always telling your kid, get a better light. You're going to ruin your eyes. I mean, this lighting was an important application, and that's what the AI people need to find, something like that.
Have you ever heard of the dead internet theory?
Maybe, I'm not sure. You're talking about enshittification or Cory Doctorow's enshittification.
I've seen you write about enshittification, but it's not really that. Basically, the dead internet theory is just that it's a point where more bots were online than humans. And there's speculation that this happened 2017, 2018, well before chat. And so then it goes back into kind of your enshittification. But I was kind of thinking back to when I first got online, where a lot of the original tools were actually to make your experience online more efficient. You could go first, say like the spam filter is probably the most obvious for your email. Now the tools are actually to keep you online longer. The whole reason you have these bots is to try to they go onto like social media websites. Let's say you start a new TikTok channel. They estimate that 98% of all the views and comments are fake. And what's the reason? Well, you all of a sudden have all these views. You just start up a channel, you got all these comments and likes. You're going to keep creating content. I almost think we could have like a reverse effect. Now, the number one use for people using chat and Claude and some of these other AI tools is basically just to generate, copy, whether that's for advertising, writing emails. I guess apparently writing an email is pretty hard. But you don't want to use, too much of your brain for something like that. We're at the point now where in a few years, maybe the internet will be so just absolutely bot filled and completely phony that maybe people will use it less. If we've already got past this point in like 2017 before the bots are taking over or whatever, I mean, what do you think about the enshittification and the dead internet theory?
I don't know if there's what percentage. I haven't read anything on that, but I wouldn't doubt it, right? It's certainly in certain situations like social media where you're trying to game an algorithm, and then you've got all these tech bros who have lots of money, right? VCs have a lot of money. Don't think they're not spending it on advertising their services, having people write articles for different websites. Almost any news media outlet is willing to do an article for you if you paid them enough money. And of course, on social media, there's no questions asked. And you look and you see the number of likes for some of these very, very optimistic, I won't name the names. I think I have them in my book, because there's a whole bunch of these people that they just get so many likes and yet they don't say much. And you can tell that, people are just mindlessly liking them for whatever reason. And as you're saying, well, perhaps it's more likely that there's a bot liking them and that they pay for the bot, or a tech company pays for the bots. I mean, I certainly see on my, a lot of my posts you don't get that many views at first. They have to get past the threshold before the algorithm kicks in and gives me more views. So I'll be getting 20 views per like for the first hour. I'll get 50 likes on 1,000 views. And then if that's enough, it usually isn't enough, but if I get enough, then it starts to kick in. And I'm getting all these people who don't comment. I know they don't like it because, well, I'm not sure. Some people don't like, even if they like a bot post, perhaps because they'll get in trouble with others. But a lot of times it could very well be, these bots that are looking for something to say. I'm not sure. But you're right. This is going to destroy the internet, all because a lot of people pay too much attention to these silly kind of statistics that somehow views and likes are perfect, tell us perfectly what goes on in the world and who's providing value. It's the same with academic papers, right? They write all these academic papers and they get cited and they're the smartest people. Well, where's the technology that's coming out from it? We talked about this in our last podcast. Well, they're not. And so just because somebody published a lot of papers doesn't mean they're the smartest around. Somebody that got the most likes doesn't mean they're the smartest around. Somebody even who got good grades because they used ChatGPT to write their article, write their term papers, that doesn't mean they're smart. You see, we've entered this world where a lot of these metrics have been so gamed that they don't mean anything. And most people are unwilling to go deeper. They just kind of accept this, right? They wrote in the Waymo and it worked. It's going to happen. I used ChatGPT and it worked. It's going to take over the world, right? So where the world is getting more complicated, the traditional metrics are becoming less useful. And yet people seem more willing to accept these very superficial metrics and superficial observations.
You're in Singapore right now, but you're from the US and you taught in Japan, but obviously you must have a lot of friends around the world. Just kind of curious, when you talk to people just in everyday life, what do they actually think about this stuff? Because I have friends that work in hospitals as nurses or doctors. I mean, a lot of them never even heard of ChatGPT. Talk like, oh, you think AI is going to replace you? Worried about that? They're like, of course not. Talking to some buddies that worked in law enforcement, you think you're going to get replaced and this? They're like, no. Yeah. Then I was talking to someone that works at a pretty successful production company. Like, yeah, we use a little bit of AI, but not much, not really going to impact employment. But it seems like when you actually talk to like real people, none of them think this thing is going to impact them. A lot of them don't even use it, don't even really know what it is. Do you experience this?
Well, first of all, you talk to a lot more regular people than I do because you're young. And I mean, I'm old. I'm in a wheelchair. I kind of don't, I have stairs. So I don't get out as much as you do. Second of all, in some of my experiences, I've asked a lot of doctors. I mean, I ask people all the time. Most people say no, they don't use it. Doctors laugh at it in Singapore, even though Singapore's pretty advanced. Singapore's a pretty advanced country, but doctors don't think it's going to change anything. And but what I mostly find is no kind of opinion. See, Singapore is a different kind of country. It's a country where people have a lot of respect for leaders, right? That doesn't sound like America, does it? People still respect their leaders here, and they respect their opinions. And they kind of expect that Singapore leaders are going to make the right decisions with respect to AI. They don't really think of it as they should have an opinion. It's just, and so except that, I'm saying something different than the government is saying. The government's kind of lukewarm. Government really doesn't say much, but the government has projects. So people kind of have a positive view of AI, but they don't have a view. And but they don't feel the need to offer an opinion. So it's really hard to get opinions about Singaporeans. If you tell them something, well, I don't think it's going to work out, then they might react because no, it'll work out. But they won't have any reason for that except that the government is lukewarm, somewhat positive towards AI, therefore, and the government works well. So it's going to happen.
Yeah, I find it interesting because some of the comments, Jeff, like you're in Asia, you're in Singapore. And some of the comments are like, well, you guys live in America. Maybe it's not that AI advanced, technologically advanced in the US, but in Asia, other parts of the world, like we have all this technology. I mean, I thought Singapore was way ahead of the US. I thought Japan, you lived in Japan as well for years. I thought Japan was way ahead. I mean, is it any different there? Do you have robots that are, you said you're in a wheelchair. I mean, you must have some robot that's moving you around and giving you all this assistance. I mean, it might even be better to be in a wheelchair with this advanced technology. I mean, am I wrong?
Well, I have an electric wheelchair that works quite well from China. So a lot of people have this perception of China, that China is going to do AI better than the US. And it may be that way, but it's hard to get details. I mean, recently I read about how they're doing automated vehicles, driverless vehicles. And what struck me was that they have very tight regulations about how people drive cars. And they have a lot of cameras that are checking on how people drive cars. So when people driving cars, they make turns correctly. They use blinkers. They turn in a very tight radius. It's not like they turn and they go out right away to the fast lane. I mean, how people drive. And so what struck me right away was, well, wow, when they're doing self-driving vehicles, they're training on people who drive correctly, right? A lot of them in America, people don't drive correctly. They run red lights and things. And thus, when you train AI systems on regular drivers, they're learning the wrong things. So, it's possible that China will do this much better than the US. I have trouble getting details, and I ask. I mean, I have friends that do work with China, and it's like, how can I find more about this? A lot of it is probably written in Chinese. It doesn't make it to the American press, but it's hard to say. I mean, at the same time, that the Chinese government controls information a lot, so perhaps a lot of what comes out is, overly optimistic. I don't know. But the car case really struck me in how, that their driverless vehicles are being trained on people driving properly.
They're not doing the farmer's stop in China then.
Yeah.
So, kind of getting back to a little bit at the beginning of this podcast, just talking about like the Gen Z not being able to find work after university. Going back to that article, I thought this is actually one of the more interesting quotes. Employers might be viewing college graduates as a negative, as evidence that applicants have picked up bad habits, such as entitlement and a weak work ethic, and are not prepared for jobs that require critical thinking and communication skills. You also kind of talk a lot about Chat GPT. So it's like you go to college now, use Chat GPT to do all your homework. How much are you really actually learning? You mentioned about how students are bragging about this. Also, the professors are then using Chat GPT to grade the homework. So how much actually learning is going on? And I was actually talking to a few of my friends that are managers, and I asked them about working with Gen Z. And they're like, oh, yeah, they're lazy. They're entitled. They don't listen to directions. They're like, I think they just grew up on social media and like, you should be making all this money for not putting in any effort. And they get offended by like the weirdest things, and you're just constantly like battling with them, but it has to be like kind of like this ninja battle because you don't want them going to HR on some, whatever. So it seems like, I don't know, maybe we're going to have to create a whole new education system.
Well, we do. I mean, you're absolutely right that the education system is terrible. But it's been declining for years. I mean, you can find books written in 1995, 2000 talking about this in detail. I mean, there's a book about 1995, 2000 that basically said, we're giving people education without any context. So 120 years ago, when kids grew up on farms, they had a context. They could see farm work. They could see what their parents did. It was hard work. There was a lot of intellectual work there, deciding on what seeds to buy, what to plant, how much to pay for it, what equipment to implement, how to fix the equipment. And even the mother was cooking from scratch. So the mother knew a lot about chemistry and things. And so when kids went to school, they already knew a lot. We just added some reading and writing and arithmetic on top of that. A lot of changes since then. When I was growing up, my father fixed things in the house, even though he was a very successful executive in the aerospace industry, but he liked to fix things. That's what he grew up doing. So I did some of it. But I wasn't as good as him. And now, of course, nobody does that stuff. Nobody cooks from scratch. Nobody, or very few people do. They don't, fix things. So they don't have any context. They're just learning this stuff, and they're not even learning it. They're regurgitating this stuff. They're regurgitating all these things, and it's kind of a disaster. There's no kind of recognition that it's not. There's a recognition it works, but people inside of it, of course, they're under such pressure that they don't have time to fix it. And I don't know what's going to happen because it has to be fixed from the inside. I'm hoping that somehow some schools will figure it out. That's one of the advantages of this, what do you call it, when you have these schools that are privately offered, and, they can make choices about what school they go to. I'm hoping that somehow better schools will emerge, but I don't know, because I see on both the right and the left this kind of emphasis on ideology and not enough emphasis on problem solving. It doesn't have to solve problems. Forget about this ideology of the right and the left. Just think about solving problems and understanding problems. And, but I'm not optimistic. And my co-author, Gary Smith, is even less optimistic because he's taught longer than I have. And he can see the problems more than I can.
It's interesting because I just had a podcast with Dr. Richard Vedder, who is an 84-year-old professor at Ohio University. He actually was friends with Milton Friedman, I find it to be pretty interesting. Shows you how long he's been around. But he wrote a book called Let Colleges Fail. And like you mentioned about how we have this 15% reduction in student admissions. And then every year from 2025 on, the high school graduating class gets smaller. So it's pretty likely we're going to have less and less high schoolers going to university. That, and as you mentioned in your article, I mean, in the article, you basically just say that, college administrators are focused on retention and graduation rates, which means keeping students happy and making it easy for them to pay their courses. Well, they have to because there's less of them. But if it keeps shrinking and you have less universities, now these universities have to compete for students. Maybe you're competing on like, hey, we have better pricing. We actually have courses that will get you a job. We have bachelor's degrees where you can graduate in 3 years instead of 6 years, which is insane. And isn't it like in most of Europe, you graduate with a bachelor's in 3 years? Why in the US is it over 5 years on average, and then you pay for all that? So I think we could see kind of a education reckoning, not because the schools want to, but because they have to with this shrinking population and competition. But maybe you look at it differently.
Well, no, I kind of look at it the same. I agree with you. But the added complication is that even if a university decides it wants to change, people at the top decide they want to change. People at the bottom are probably not going to change. You have to realize that in universities, people at the bottom have all the power. You got tenure. You can't be fired. People on the bottom determine what's top. And what are the people at the bottom measured by? How many articles they publish with. So we talked about this, a little today and in our first podcast. That's what they're measuring. They actually don't know the subject. See, this is what they know, and this is what they're asked to teach. They don't know that. So they teach this. And a lot of times they don't realize that they don't know much. They just kind of say, well, I published this article. Yeah, I can talk about that. I know this. But they have no idea. And we see that with business schools and all their hype about AI and entrepreneurship. It's kind of useless. And, if you ever get one of these famous professors, business professors in your podcast, ask them, and they're an optimist about AI, ask them what academic article or articles are they basing their assessment of AI on? There are none. No articles on this. He said, this is what I wrote my entire career. Now, I constantly got people telling me, no, this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. All this doesn't matter. All this exponential improvements, all this doesn't matter. And I wrote about that in a number of articles, but in one, I talked about the iPhone. I talked about what kind of memory and stuff you needed to save apps on your phone, to save songs, blah, blah, blah. So I went into a lot of detail, and the reviewer said, no, there's nothing to do with this. Apple offered an app store. That's what caused it to succeed. That's what they're getting in the classroom. They're getting people say things like this, and they say, oh, well, this company has an app store, it's going to win. It's going to succeed. They don't have any basis for it. So, ask those professors. It's not based on well, I've read all these histories of technologies, and the ones that succeeded were this and this and this and this. It's none of that, because they don't read those histories. They don't read the histories because that doesn't help them get published. They do quantitative studies that usually analyze the relationship between number of patents and number of papers published. And so they really don't know anything. And even in engineering schools, you have professors that are so narrowly focused, because that's what they have to do to get publications. You don't get publications by being broad and knowing what engineers do in industry and how to solve problems. No, you get tenure and succeed by publishing all these narrow papers in all these narrow journals. There was one Nature journal in 1970. There's like 500 now, or hundreds. Sorry, I can't remember the number now. But the point is, there's this explosion of papers and journals, and that's what we have in the professors. So if you ask them to actually teach better, they can't. What we should do is we should have retired people, working people, teach classes, or more of the class, not all of them, but you got to get some of them to teach the classes, and because in a lot of cases they know more about the real world than the professor does.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit off topic, but just since we're talking about the universities, you live in Japan, Singapore, and you used to live in the U.S., teach in the U.S. What's the difference between the university system and, say, the U.S. versus Singapore, Japan, from the actual institution, the actual level of the university, and then from the student? Like, are students there also using ChatGPT to cheat, or do they care actually more about learning? Is it pretty much the same? Is it different? I mean, I know that in the U.S. we have these universities with big sport programs and lazy rivers and whatnot, which you don't necessarily have in most of the rest of the world.
Well, ChatGPT is used in Singapore. I don't have statistics on how much it's used, but my son claims that a lot of students use it, and he's 12. So, he says he doesn't, and I'm hoping he doesn't. And Singapore and U.S. universities are similar because they both emphasize publications, papers, and they like to brag about how they're ranked so high. And of course, I think that's useless. And I wish that I could get a minister's attention to say, this rankings don't matter. What have these universities done for the Singaporean people? What science and technology have they developed that's done something for the Singaporean people? We should ask the same thing in America and Europe too, because there isn't much. So we're asking the wrong questions, but it's because we have the same metrics. Japan is different. I haven't been there for a long time, but Japan they just kind of publish papers in their own journals, and there's no kind of criteria, really objective criteria to analyze, to measure their professors. But Japanese do win Nobel Prizes, some. None from Singapore. There's never been any Nobel Prize in Singapore, but you get some from Japan. I think there's areas of brilliance, just some professor who's internally motivated, because the pay isn't high in Japan. You have to be internally motivated, and there are people like that. And so in some ways, I think that Japan would be easier to change. The universities can be easier to change than the one in the U.S., because if you got universities to work more closely with companies, they wouldn't feel a resistance, because they wouldn't say, well, you're measuring how many papers I publish in these journals, so how can I do that? They'd be like, okay, we'll work with these companies, and just out of pride, some of them are going to do well. See, in America, we've got this really, contradictory measures of performance. We want these universities to do all the things we've talked about, but at the same time, we want people to keep publishing all these papers. Well, it can't work that way. You're going to have to, the measures that you have for individual professors has to be consistent with the measures, the expectations you have at the societal level. They have to be consistent, and they're not.
I had a professor who told me that you'll learn more in an internship than you will learn in your entire 4 years at university. Then I'm thinking, like, okay, then why am I going to university if I could just get an internship?
No, you're right. That those comments really told you more about the university than about anything else. It really told you, and he or she knew that there were problems with the university system, and but they were powerless to change them.
Dr. Jeffrey Funk, retired technology economist and former university professor in Japan and Singapore, who specializes in innovation, startup bubbles, and the economic effects of emerging technologies. Dr. Funk is also the author of the recent book, Unicorns, Hype, and Bubbles, a guide to spotting, avoiding, and exploiting bubbles in tech. So, Dr. Funk, thank you so much for being here today. Just two final questions. One, where can people buy your book, Unicorns, Hype, and Bubbles? Where can people find you on LinkedIn, get your articles, all that good information? And then secondly, leave us with a final thought related to this podcast or whatever is on your mind.
Okay, well, the book is available on Amazon. It's also available in English bookstores from Harriman House. It's available in English bookstores in the U.S., Singapore, the U.K., probably other countries. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Jeffrey Lee Funk. That's also my email address, jeffreyleefunk@gmail.com. So I post something almost every day related to technology, so you can follow that on LinkedIn. My final thought is, I know I come across as a pessimist, but don't let that stop you. If you solves problems, figure out how to solve problems, and you will succeed. Because a lot of people aren't solving problems. A lot of people are just talking about problems. And when I look back on my career, I kind of say, I wish I'd solved more problems. I've been just talking about problems as a professor. Solve problems, right? If you've got any even if you don't have a technical degree, you can solve problems, because lots of, service industries require people to think about workflows and things. So there's plenty of problems to solve. And if you think about this, if you think about how to solve problems, you will be able to solve them. So good luck in your career.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.